All right, welcome to the deep dive. So today, we're diving into something that's been making waves lately, declining reading levels. And specifically, we're talking about young people in the U.S.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic. A lot of folks are talking about it.
For sure. And we've got some great sources lined up. We've got a YouTube video, some teachers sharing their experiences, and some pretty powerful graphs too. Oh, and some arguments, some pretty thought-provoking arguments that we're going to unpack.
Interesting. Looking forward to that.
Yeah. So by the end of this, we're going to try to figure out, not just what's going on, but why it matters so much. And, what we should be asking ourselves, where we should be going from here.
Big questions.
Yeah. And the thing is, right off the bat, this video, it hits you with this quote from a 7th grade teacher. And she says, I take 7th grade. They were still performing on the 4th grade level. Like, wow.
Yeah, that's pretty eye-opening right there.
Right. And what's even more striking is that it's not just her. The video goes on to show that it's teachers all over it. They're sharing the same worries. So it's not just like a one-off thing. It's like nationwide. It's a national problem.
Makes you wonder what's going on, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So let's dig in. What's driving all this?
Well, one thing the video points to is the growing gap between the rich and the poor. And, we've talked about this before, but it's really relevant here.
For sure. For sure.
Because what they're seeing is wealthier kids, they often have access to things like tutors, enriching activities, and they also get a lot more support from their parents when it comes to education.
Yeah, and that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, students from lower income families, they're often starting out already at a disadvantage.
Right.
And the thing is, those disadvantages, they kind of snowball over time. So if a child is already behind in reading by the time they get to middle school, it's so much harder to catch up.
Oh, for sure.
It's like trying to climb a mountain that keeps getting taller.
Right. And the video really drives that home. They show these teachers describing, students who don't even know basic spelling, or they're showing up to school hungry. It's really tough stuff.
Yeah. And that just underscores the fact that, this isn't just about reading levels, it's about opportunity, or the lack of it, really. It's about, are we headed towards a society where your chances in life are determined by your economic background?
Right. Yeah. And it's something we see reflected in so many other areas beyond just education.
Yeah, it's a pattern for sure.
Yeah. Now, another thing the video brings up is, along with these economic disparities, there's the whole smartphone thing.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. They actually show this really interesting graph. It basically connects the rise of smartphones with a decline in, you guessed it, reading scores.
Makes you think, right? And they play this clip of one teacher, and she literally says she can't compete with her students' phones for their attention.
It makes sense, right? How do you get kids excited about reading a book or thinking deeply about something when they have access to social media, instant entertainment?
Right. It's hard to compete with that.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, with all that stimulation, those shorter attention spans, can you even get to that point of deep reading and comprehension?
Oh, that's a good question.
It really is. And what's interesting is the video actually gives this example of a school district in Florida. They decided to just ban phones altogether.
Wow, really?
Yeah, completely ban them. And what they saw was an improvement in student behavior and a jump in grades.
That's pretty powerful.
It is, right. It suggests that maybe just giving kids a break from that constant digital stuff can free them up to focus more and really engage with learning in a deeper way.
Yeah, it's like decluttering their mental space or something.
Yeah, exactly. And it brings us to another big thing the video talks about. No child left behind.
Okay, interesting. I remember that from back in the day, but...
Yeah. It's fascinating to think about how this law, even though it was well-intentioned, might have actually made things worse in some ways.
Yeah, how so?
Well, the video argues that the big focus on standardized testing ended up shifting the emphasis away from real learning, critical thinking, that kind of stuff.
The teaching to the test thing.
Exactly. The classic teaching to the test dilemma.
Yeah.
And the video doesn't just tell us this, it shows us. They have these clips of teachers talking about how they feel pressured to teach to the test and how they're struggling to meet the needs of, both their struggling students and their advanced students.
That's rough.
It is. And they talk about how it's even affecting their morale.
Yeah. And it raises the question, did No Child Left Behind, even though they didn't mean to, did it create this culture where testing became more important than actually understanding the material?
It's a valid question for sure. And it makes you wonder, if that's the case, what does it mean for how we approach education going forward?
Yeah, that's a big one. It feels like all these things are connected, the economic disparities, the pull of technology, and maybe even a system that's unintentionally prioritizing test scores over a love of learning.
It's a complex web, definitely. And it's one that deserves a lot more attention as we think about how to, raise a generation of strong readers and critical thinkers.
Absolutely. So where do we go from here? I mean, if reading is the foundation of, knowledge and critical thinking, what does this trend mean for civic engagement?
Yeah.
For the future of our democracy?
Big questions, right. And it's interesting, the video doesn't specifically dive into this next part, but it got me thinking. What role does media literacy play in all of this?
Ooh, that's interesting. Media literacy, yeah. Tell me more.
Well, we talked about, the potential downsides of smartphones and that constant flow of information.
Yeah.
But what if we gave young people the tools to critically evaluate that information? Like, what if they learned how to separate fact from fiction, how to recognize bias, to really engage thoughtfully with what they're seeing online?
I love that because they're going to be spending so much time online anyway. Why not teach them how to navigate that world effectively and responsibly?
Exactly. Because in a world that's, overflowing with information, it's not just about being able to read the words. It's about understanding the context, the intent, the messages beneath the surface. That's media literacy in action.
Yeah. And that's something to think about as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into declining reading levels. It's a complex issue, no easy answers, but hopefully we've given you some food for thought and maybe even like a little spark of hope that maybe by embracing media literacy and fostering a love of learning, we can turn this tide.
When we talk about declining rating levels, what we're really talking about is a decline in the ability to think critically, to engage deeply with complex ideas. And those are the skills that, a thriving democracy depends on.
Absolutely. And when we think about those essential skills, it's not just about what's happening in schools. It's about what's happening in our homes, in our communities, in our society as a whole.
One thing that really struck me in the video was the passion and dedication of the teachers. I mean, they're on the front lines of this, and they're deeply invested in finding solutions.
Yeah, they really are. And they have so much insight. Like at one point, a teacher mentions how important it is for parents to be involved in their kids' education.
Yeah.
And not just like checking homework, but actually modeling a love of reading themselves.
That's such a good point. Children learn by watching the adults in their lives. So if they see their parents reading, for pleasure, for information, for engaging with the world, they're more likely to pick up those habits themselves.
Actions speak louder than words.
Right, exactly. And it's not just about parents. It's about creating a culture that values reading and critical thinking, supporting our libraries, funding arts and literacy programs, engaging in thoughtful discussions about the things that matter.
And maybe, just maybe, putting down our phones every once in a while and picking up a book instead.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, well, on that note, I think it's time we come up for air from this deep dive.
Indeed. But as we do, it's important to remember that, declining reading levels, they're a symptom of larger challenges facing our society.
So true. It's not just about words on a page. It's about the opportunities those words can unlock or, fail to unlock for individuals and for our society as a whole.
It's a conversation we need to keep having, especially as the world gets more and more complex.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on all of this? Head over to our social media channels and let us know. We'd love to hear your perspectives and keep this important discussion going.
Until next time, keep those minds engaged and those critical thinking skills sharp.
And keep diving deep.
Yeah. It's like, are we setting up a system where if you're born into a certain economic situation, you're basically stuck?
Right. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
And, that's something to really think about.
For sure. So along with those economic disparities, the video also brings up another possible culprit, smartphones.
Oh, yeah. Smartphones. That's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah. Right. They actually show this really striking graph that connects the rise of smartphones with, guess what? A decline in reading scores.
Not surprising.
Not really, but it's still like when you see it visually, it's like, whoa.
Definitely makes you think.
And they have this clip of a teacher who says, point blank, like she can't compete with her students' phones for their attention.
Yeah. It's like, how do you compete with that? It's constant entertainment, instant gratification.
Right. You're trying to get them to focus on a book, think deeply about something, and they've got this little device that's like ping, ping, ping all the time.
It's tough. And it makes you wonder, with all that constant stimulation, those shorter attention spans, can anyone even get to that point of deep reading and comprehension anymore?
It's a good question. It really is. And what's interesting is the video gives this example of a school district in Florida. They completely banned phones.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And what they found was an improvement in student behavior and an increase in grades.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, it really suggests that giving kids a break from all that digital stuff can free them up to focus more and really, get into their learning.
It's like hitting the reset button on their brains or something.
Right. And it brings us to another big point the video makes. No child left behind.
Okay, yeah. No child left behind. And that was like almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, something like that. It's crazy to think about, actually. But it's interesting because the video argues that this law, while well-intentioned, may have actually done more harm than good.
Really? How so?
Well, they argue that the intense focus on standardized testing ended up taking the emphasis away from actual learning critical thinking, you know?
Yeah, teaching to the test.
Exactly. And they don't just tell us, they show us. They have these clips of teachers, and they're talking about how they feel pressured to teach to the test and how they're struggling to balance, the needs of their students who are behind with the needs of their students who are ahead.
Yeah. Trying to make sure no child is left behind. But in the process, maybe something got lost.
Right. And they even talk about how it's affecting their morale, as teachers.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it raises a big question. Did No Child Left Behind, even though they didn't intend for it to, did it create this culture where testing became more important than understanding?
That's the question, isn't it? And it makes you wonder, if that is the case, what does that mean for the future of education?
Right. It feels like all these things are connected, the economic disparities, the pull of technology, and maybe even a system that's like inadvertently prioritizing test scores over genuine learning.
It's a complex web, for sure.
It really is. So where do we go from here? If reading is so fundamental to, knowledge and critical thinking, what does all this mean for things like civic engagement, for the future of our democracy?
That's $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
The video doesn't explicitly address this, but it got me thinking about the role of media literacy in all of this.
Ooh, okay. Media literacy. I like where you're going with this.
Well, we've talked about the potential downsides of smartphones and that constant flow of information.
Right.
But what if we equipped young people with the tools to critically analyze that information, to know how to distinguish fact from fiction, to recognize bias, to engage thoughtfully with everything they're seeing online?
That's a great point. I mean, they're going to be spending so much time online anyway. Might as well teach them how to navigate that world safely and responsibly.
Exactly. Because in a world that's just overflowing with information, it's not just about reading the words anymore. It's about understanding the context, the intent, the messages. That's media literacy in action.
Yeah, I love that. It's like reading between the lines, but for the digital age.
Exactly. And, it's something to really consider as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into declining reading levels. It's a complicated issue, no easy answers. But hopefully we've, given everyone some food for thought and maybe even a little bit of hope that maybe, just maybe, by embracing media literacy, by fostering a love of learning, we can turn this ship around.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, when we talk about declining reading levels, what we're really talking about is a decline in the ability to think critically, to engage deeply with complex ideas.
And that's what makes a thriving democracy, right?
Right. And when we talk about these essential skills, it's not just about schools. It's about our homes, our communities, our society as a whole.
It takes a village, as they say.
And one thing that really impressed me in the video was the passion of the teachers. They're the ones on the front lines, and they're so committed to finding solutions.
Yeah, they're amazing. And they have so much to offer. I remember this one teacher in the video. She talks about how important it is for parents to be involved in their kids' education.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not just like checking homework, but actually, modeling a love of reading themselves.
That's such a powerful point because kids, they learn by watching us, So if they see their parents reading for pleasure, for learning, for engaging with the world, they're more likely to develop those habits themselves.
It's like, we can preach all we want, but if we're not walking the walk.
Exactly. And it's not just parents. It's about creating a culture, a society that values reading and critical thinking. Supporting our libraries, funding arts and literacy programs, having those tough conversations about the things that matter.
And maybe even just putting down our phones sometimes and picking up a book,
You know what? Maybe that's the first step, just putting down the phone and opening a book.
Couldn't agree more. All right, well, I think it's time we surface from this deep dive.
Indeed. But as we come up for air, it's crucial to remember that these declining reading levels, they're not just a standalone problem.
Right, they're a symptom of something bigger.
Exactly. And it's a conversation we need to keep having, especially as the world, keeps changing and getting more complex.
Absolutely. And to all our listeners out there, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this? Hit us up on social media. Let's keep this conversation going.
Until next time, keep those minds engaged and thinking critically.
And keep diving deep.
It's like we need a whole new definition of literacy for the 21st century.
Right. It's not just about reading words on a page anymore. It's about navigating this crazy world of information.
Yeah.
Online, offline, everywhere.
Exactly. And that's a skill we all need, right? Not just young people.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about all the misinformation out there. The bias, the spin.
It's overwhelming. We all need to be more careful about the information we consume. That's how we protect ourselves from, getting misled. And that's how we form balanced opinions, how we contribute to a healthier public discourse.
You said it. Couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, I think it's time to come up for air from this deep dive.
Indeed. But as we surface, it's important to remember that declining reading levels, they're a symptom of something much bigger.
Right. It's not just about words on a page. It's about the opportunities those words can unlock or, fail to unlock.
For individuals, for society as a whole.
Exactly. It's a conversation we need to keep having, especially as the world keeps changing and getting more complex.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on all of this? Join the conversation. Head over to our social media channels and let us know what you think.
Yeah, we love hearing from you guys. Keep the discussion going.
Until next time, keep those minds sharp, keep thinking critically.
And keep diving deep.